Welcome to the Shooting Times podcast. The Shooting Times podcast is brought to you by Field Sports Press, our new owner. I'm Partrick Galbraith, the veteran editor now of Shooting Times. I've been at it since I was 23, so 7 years now I've been in the editor's chair. I'm joined today by Simon Barr, the chief executive of Field Sports Press. Simon, I believe that you have the latest issue of Shooting Times there with you.
I do. It's one of the privileges I get. It comes to me one day early before it hits the newsstand. So this is the very issue that we're going to be discussing today, with the 16th of August on the cover.
I normally get mine about... sometimes I think 2 days after you get yours, and I was just up on the Isle of Harris where they get theirs about a week after. I was noting that their latest copy of Country Life had arrived on the Isle of Harris, which was 3 weeks old, which was quite something. But anyway,
it's looking good. New cover, new paper stock.
Better paper stock. Yeah, I actually
investing in it.
I drove past the new printer last night. I was driving over the Ooze washes at about midnight, and I drove past the new printer. They were all shut up, but I think they use sort of sustainable British paper and all that kind of thing, which was...
We made a decision to move away from the paper stock that was previously used. It's made from recycled stock in the UK, so it's British paper for a British title. We've upgraded the weight of the cover, which I'm sure our regular readers will see, and the stock inside is a heavier weight as well. So
it's quite cool in a world where, you know, print titles are sort of going from nice paper to kind of loo paper pretty quickly to go in the other direction. We
cool. Value our print titles, and this is one of many that we publish, and you know it's one of the jewels in the crown, and we felt it needed some investment, and we're very happy to see how good it looks with upgraded paper and better green credentials as well.
So what we want to do in this podcast is to talk about news stories. You know, that's something that Shooting Times has always done. It's always broken news stories for over 140 years now. It's provided the news. It's provided news analysis. So we want to sort of look at the hottest topics. And at the moment, there are some really very hot topics indeed. This week, Simon, you've got the news stories there in front of you. We're looking at United Utilities again, which is an evolving news story. I think I was on my way to a wedding when that story broke. I was all dressed up. I'd actually had a beer, a pre-church beer, which I think is always a good thing to do at a wedding, when that story broke, and you got on the phone, and we spent about an hour going back and forth, calling people up in the area. And the people in the area were pretty devastated when that broke. There's an old guy, I think, who you've shot with, a guy called Peter Pedder.
Runs a lovely shoot.
76 years old, that guy. And he said it's not just an environmental issue for him. There's also, you know, a social issue. He said he's got, or a people issue. He's got a keeper there. He's got a child in the local school. You know, there's family regulars at the local pub. And when grouse shooting ends, you know, you end up sort of tearing the heart out of rural communities and places that have been kind of de-peopled. The reason that United Utilities said they were doing it were environmental reasons, really, but they now extraordinarily seem to have backpedaled on this, and they said that what they want to do is they want to talk to local stakeholders and they want to understand the impact. But you know, in many ways, the decision's been taken. Well, exactly, and I think there's just a really important lesson for all of us, you know, whether we're just individuals or businesses, to like try and really understand an issue before you just kind of go in swinging. In a way, it's you know, when you look at it in the cold light of day, it's almost hard not to feel sorry for this company. I think they had almost 70,000 sewage leaks in 2022. I think they thought that this was their like get out of jail free card. You know, you go for like the tyranny of the majority over the minority, and actually, you know, the countryside has turned around and said, we don't reckon very much of that, actually. So, you know, it's really interesting from a business perspective.
And I think, I mean, the Countryside Alliance have done a really good job. Tim Bonner wrote an open letter to them, and they created a petition. 6,000 people have signed up to the petition. So the Countryside community came together on this one very quickly. The Countryside Alliance and others, Basque, I know, and some local groups have been in touch with them. So I think they've probably listened, and let's hope they backtrack on a bad decision.
I mean, I think the thing with grouse moor management is it's so complicated. I mean, I spent a little bit of time recently with some guys who were burning heather. There'd been a big wildfire up in Scotland, and I drove up to see them, and I learned a huge amount during the course of that morning. There were guys there, like 4th, 5th generation keepers who'd learnt how to fight fire on the hill from their fathers and from their grandfathers and from their great-grandfathers. And, you know, I think the idea that people can sit around in an office and think, right, this is how we're going to do it because we understand this issue, it's really mad. So I hope if there is a sort of silver lining here, I hope that other businesses who have swathes of land will think, actually, we don't want to make the mistake that those guys made. And maybe they will change their
National
mind.
Trust, others.
Well, there's loads of them. I mean, you've got mining companies in Scotland with like the best part of 100,000 acres, and there are people on that land. There's sort of cultures on that land, and so yeah, it's really interesting. I think one of the other stories which you've got there in front of you, I think, is the debanking story.
Laughable. I mean, off the back of the Farage-Keats scenario, we're now being debanked because we participate in shooting. So I think it's the story is that a number of banks have closed accounts if it's a shoot-based account with anything to do with the word shooting in the bank account name. There's been a number of high street banks that have withdrawn their services from those accounts, which I think is pretty shocking.
Well, I mean, it's interesting that you say it's off the back of the Farage situation. I mean, I heard from one of the biggest agents in field sports over a year ago now that they'd been debanked and they wanted to kind of keep it quiet, so we didn't do a story on it. And now, I mean, I think people coming back to Basque, it was like 65% of people they polled said that of shooting businesses said that they'd have problems with their banking, which is just nuts. And then when they really looked into it, 57% of those people said that basically the bank came back to them and said they didn't want to be associated in any way with anybody who was connected with firearms, which is like, okay, sure, but like, does that mean the RSPB? I mean, they've got people controlling foxes and shooting corvids and so on. Like, are those guys? Are we going to bank those guys? Forestry Commission. I mean, big working estates. Like the Holcombe Estate. Alnwick. All of those places. I mean, those are places that people love to visit and sort of do tremendous things for conservation. Like, do we debank all of those guys? Yeah. So it kind of goes back to that thing. I think if somebody sits there and thinks, what would make our customers really, really pleased would be if we sort of, debank these guys, and they take these decisions and then think, actually, God, like, it was a hell of a lot more complicated than we thought. So
yeah, and hopefully again the community will come together, led by our great organisations, and poll and lobby and get petitions signed and demonstrate to the banks that actually there's a lot of us in the countryside that partake in that, and if we decide to go to a shooting friendly bank, it's quite a few accounts that will be proactively closed if there's a bank that won't support the shooting sector.
Maybe there's a gap in the market for a shooting friendly bank. Ask no questions. I think that's a kind of offshore situation.
Yeah, there's a couple of quite interesting stories in this week's issue that relate to Scotland. Obviously, I'm based up in Edinburgh.
Yeah.
I was lucky to have a day out on the Tweed last week, and I've not seen as many fish in the Tweed as that for a long time now. Given the water conditions were pretty much optimal, and historically, I think the last 2 or 3 summers we've had very dry summers, which isn't good for salmon running. So we've had a lot of wet in Scotland through July that has led to high water that's clear rather than a flood where it goes very dirty and it won't fish very well.
Did you catch many fish?
I had a sea trout, and the 2 guys that I were with, I think between us, I lost 3 salmon. I caught a sea trout. My friend caught 3. My other friend lost 1 and caught 2.
Wow.
So it was a bumper day, and a day like I've not had on the Tweed for a long time. I think we can get a bit clouded by some good catch numbers because of good water conditions and think that salmon fishing's okay. I think there's still a lot of things to worry about.
It's also just so varied. I mean, I was up last week at Armansui, which is up in Harwich, so about as far away as you can get from where I am at the moment in Norfolk, and certainly very far away from Edinburgh too. But they've had a very poor season, and their problem is that they've not had enough rain. So where the rest of the UK is getting absolutely sort of more rain than we know what to do with. The poor guys at Armansui are sort of waking up every morning and hoping that it's gonna. Yeah, I mean,
they're a wild creature that respond to the conditions on the day or the month, and I think there has been the rainfall. I mean, the Spey had its worst spring on record.
Really, wow.
Really, really, significantly down on last year. I think catches across Scotland were down about 30% in spring, and that was off the back of the worst spring ever. So, this spring run is not there, the autumn run is not there, and the fish seem to come in summer if there's rain now, which is pot luck with British summertime. So another interesting story, Patrick, staying in Scotland, is that the male deer season is being removed. I think is it the 22nd of October that's coming in, or around then. And the accusation is there's been not enough consultation on it, as always.
Yeah. I mean, I was in Loch Ernhead yesterday talking to a guy who used to have the stalking at Glen Lyon, I believe, and I was asking him, and he just said he thinks it's very sad, really. It kind of it removes. I think it removes a degree of respect, actually, that people historically have had for deer when you start to just see them as a problem rather than as something to be cherished and as a resource. I mean, there's another story, I think, in our news pages this week about the fact that venison just isn't utilised in the way that it should be.
I mean, post-COVID, the venison prices have been very, very low. And the worry is that this is going to put lower quality venison onto the market because it will be going on all year round. The one benefit, I guess, is you don't need to shoot stags during the rut. You can shoot them all year round. But maybe if it was an extra 2 weeks post-rut, or they start pretty early in Scotland, but maybe there was a way around it rather than a sort of... And also, it's not just about stags, it's all deer species, fallow and roe as well in Scotland, and sika. So, I think it's a great pity. I mean, we've got, a couple of 100 years worth of heritage of having seasons and doing things the way that we've done them. And now it's all with thermals and nighttime and, lowering the number of deer per square kilometre. And it seems like it's turned into, a all-out slaughter and actually, if you want to get the population down, you do it with the females, not the males. You need one stag and a herd of hinds, and then away you go. It just seems like it's not been considered in the way that I would imagine it would be if they really wanted to get a population down.
No, I mean, it's really interesting, just that whole thing of understanding things before decisions are taken. And actually that leads on very interestingly to a story on a forthcoming consideration of the species that we shoot. And Basque have tried to kind of get ahead on this one. And they're saying that, we need to self-regulate in some...
Which species are the... I understand, is it ptarmigan, black grouse?
No, I mean, I don't actually think it's been made clear yet which it will be. But I mean, for example, right, snipe. Snipe's always a contentious one. But I think the point would be is that, snipe are in decline in places, but shooting hasn't been shown, I think, anywhere to have an impact on snipe numbers negatively. At the same time, we know that there are lots of people, I myself have been one of them over the years, who have maintained bits of habitat for snipe. So, what's the true picture? Does shooting have a net positive impact on snipe or a negative impact on snipe, right? And, if you're on social media and you put something out and said, this bird is struggling in some places, should people stop shooting it? Well, of course, that's a pretty easy one to answer if you're there on social media in your pajamas, lying on your sofa kind of thing. But I think what Basque have said is we really need to ensure that the people who take these decisions actually understand them, and that they are taking these decisions based on science and not just one study.
GWCT.
Well, from everybody. Do you know what I mean? I mean, you can't just. I mean, there's people always say, I'm looking to the science, but what science, and how much science, and how many researchers have come together, and is it peer reviewed? You know what I mean? I mean, I think we need to have as many people in the room when these decisions are being taken, and actually we need to have the people in the room and the people who are being affected. Essentially, they need to be in the room, right? And they need to be consulted, and that's a worry.
Speaking of social media, I noticed quite an interesting poll, which one of the team put up on the Shooting Times Twitter feed. Which would be your favourite style of shooting, and it was unanimously walked up shooting at 49%, which was quite nice to see.
Yeah. It's really funny, those polls. I poll all the time. I mean, I did a poll yesterday about wolves. Are we pro-wolf, anti-wolf, or pro-bear? But they're quite interesting, and it's often surprising. Particularly on Twitter, interestingly, there's a real kind of group of very ethically conscious shooters, which is interesting. What else is there that's caught your attention in the news this week? Is there anything? There was something on pigeon shooting, I think. It's been a hard season for pigeon shooters.
Yeah, with such a wet summer.
Yeah.
Which, will have a negative impact on crop yields. Pigeon shooting's obviously something that is a way of managing damage to crop. And I guess it's much harder to deal with the issue when the weather's very poor. So I think that's
and also just for farmers out there at the moment. I mean, harvest is tough. I mean, they're having to take their opportunities when they can. So it's very interesting. I think if you get very into pigeon shooting, you end up having lots of conversations with farmers. And again, it's one of those things where you realise, there's a video I saw the other day of a man coming out in Suffolk in his pajamas and getting very upset with somebody who was combining, and the person who was combining was saying to him, what do you mean you're upset that we're combining through the night? We've got to take every opportunity at the moment we can get when it's not absolutely pissing it down with rain, which is, it's really interesting. And moving on to features, was there anything in this issue that interested you?
I always like to see a bit of Tom Payne. And I've noted that obviously that's also on the shooting show. So if anyone that's listening to this or watching this on YouTube fancies dipping over to our other channel, our YouTube channel, Shooting Show, that will be featured on the Shooting Show, I think, this week. So definitely worth checking that out.
He's excited about that, actually. He called me yesterday to tell me how well he'd got on. So
yeah, it was an interesting piece from Tim Bonner about the sort of forecast of what grouse shooting looks like.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, it's
I mean, I say "oh really" because I was away last week fishing, so I vaguely know what was in this magazine that I edit, but
yeah, he just talks about the uncertain future of grouse shooting, and moorland management in Scotland. Obviously, licensing looming. We don't know how that's going to shake down. And actually, back to news, there was a case of bird flu found in the first.
Oh yeah,
case
I saw that. Yeah,
bird flu found in a red grouse in the Borders.
I mean, so people were tweeting, saying, so surely this means that the Glorious 12th can't go ahead. And I don't know. I mean, what impact? I mean, look, trying to look at it completely objectively, that didn't seem to be a logical thing to be saying, but it just, it became like this kind of battleground.
Well, it's just
nonsense.
another thing. But wild birds don't congregate. Certainly, grouse don't congregate in the same numbers that are in an intensively farmed scenario with chickens, for example, poultry. And so, the impact is going to be pretty low. Actually, one thing I did notice when I was fishing on the Tweed, it was a lovely beat, Bergam dub. I saw from the walk from you have to go across the river in a boat, but from the boat over to where we started at the top of the beat, I must have counted 50 dead seagulls.
Really? Really?
Yeah, so bird flu's absolutely still here this season.
And how did you cook them?
I didn't quite fancy a little sort of barbecue on the riverbank, but it was just interesting. And there were carcasses of different decay, so there were fresh ones, there were
really? It's actually quite interesting, isn't it, when you see that and you get it and you can see what they've been eating sometimes, and so on.
But I mean, it's still there. We'll see how that pans out for the season ahead.
There was a very interesting piece I thought this week by Richard Negus on non-toxic shot. He said to me, he said the first time I reviewed a non-toxic load for you was in 2019, which so we've really been at it for quite a long time with trying out different cartridges. And he said he's just really pleased about how far they've come. And he says, most seasons now he tries something which he thinks is a real improvement on, whatever there was the season before. So that's certainly quite interesting. Bioammo Blue is one that he particularly
I've got it
likes.
open in front of me, and quite a deep dive into it. Something we all need to consider, I guess. Lots of stuff in there. Latest issue about the game fair, which happened a few weeks ago. Very positive responses from everybody post the game fair.
Yeah, I was slogging it out on the stage with Mark Osborne. He said to me, every 5 years we get together and have an argument on the stage in the theatre, which is true. I think it was 5 years.
I heard you didn't pull any punches.
No, I think neither of us did. But we sort of came to a. Charlie Jacoby, our friend at Field Sports Britain, he likes to always come up with a contentious theme. So it was, big bags, basically, good or bad. And we both said, actually, you know what? It's not really about bag sizes, except for public perception, which I think is a strand that we need to consider. But, it's about whether shoots are doing good in terms of conservation or not. And that's a pretty simple question.
Yeah, and I think those that oppose what we do dislike one bird being shot versus 500 birds.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting. I would actually disagree. I disagree on that. I think that there are grey areas, and I think there are lots of people who are more kind of tuned in, perhaps, to shooting them than we maybe realise who don't actually shoot themselves. It's interesting. It's well worth going around just asking people what they think. I think.
Yeah, I mean, I just 500 bird days or a 500 bird. I'm not a big advocate for big bag days, but I feel that we ourselves in the community criticize one another for things that probably aren't that relevant outside of our sector. It's more that people just don't like the fact that we shoot things. It's not about the size of the bag, I believe. But
it's interesting.
Hotly disputed topic, I think, isn't it? So
I think I hang out with too many kind of 30-something-year-old people in South London who've been reading up on venison and would like to eat more of it or whatever. But that's probably a fairly small section of the British public. But I think there is an appetite for like wild food, which is quite interesting. So-called wild food. Maybe we should rebrand game wild food. Everyone's very into rebranding things at the moment.
Yeah. Well, we're not going to rebrand the Shooting Times, that's for sure.
Does what it says on the tin.
I think so, yeah. And the news piece in the Shooting Times is so important, and I guess that's one of the main reasons to do the podcast, is to bring the news to life. Hopefully people will be able to engage with the news stories on their way to work or sitting in a high seat or as they're trying to drift off to sleep in the evenings to listen to all the woes of the shooting sector. But I think this is something that we've talked about for a long time, and I'm really excited to get it off the ground.
Yeah.
Something sort of lighter topic. Nick Ridley's written a lovely piece about the real worth of a working spaniel, and it's great to see him in the mag. So
the value, yeah, what we should pay for working spaniels, yeah. No, he's a new addition. I mean, it's one of the great pleasures I think of editing Shooting Times is you have to wake up every Monday and think, how can I make this magazine a bit better than it was last week? So, Nick Ridley's a new face in there. I mean, he's not a totally new face in there. He's written for us before, but he's a new columnist. And he's great, I mean, we had a bit of a lack, I think, of working spaniel stuff. So he's really good. And he poses a really interesting question. I mean, if you've got a working spaniel, I've got a working spaniel. If we'd paid £8,000 for our dogs, actually over the course of their working life, that would probably represent good value.
Yeah. And we had that crazy situation where the price of dogs went through the roof during COVID, and I think it's normalised again now but probably still. I remember when you could buy a spaniel for 350 quid, and that's your buddy for 14 years. It seems like a total bargain. It depends.
I bought a poodle. I bought a poodle for £500 about 15 years ago. I was very aggressive. It was a real biter. So never again.
One of the things I'm sure you talked to Chris Packham about is your love of poodles.
Well, exactly. Our mutual love of poodles. Yeah. I can't talk about the poodle book we've got coming out together, but I think lastly, I opened up the PDFs. You've got the proper copy in front of you. I've only got the PDFs at this stage. There's a guy called Miles Malone who started writing for us. Really terrific writer. I was just reading about his sort of evocation of the wash, or the fens and this battle between kind of sea and land. And Shooting Times has always been a place that's championed great writing. I was really cheered recently. Mark Avery, who's no friend of driven grouse shooting, certainly said that there are lots of things in Shooting Times he doesn't like, but he thinks that the writing is really, really brilliant. And Miles Malone is a new writer and is great. So and also young writers. I mean, we've got a lot of young writers now, and whenever young people get in touch with me and they say they'd like to write something, whenever I can, I try and put an hour aside to talk to them about their writing. So it's really nice to see new voices.
Great to see
very interesting voices in there.
Speaking of young voices, Johnny Carter's got a great review of the Ithaca Model 37, which is a blast from the past. Fabulous pump-action shotgun, and he's done it justice, I think, which is... I
thought you were going to say Johnny Scott there, speaking of young voices.
No, he's at the other end of the spectrum, I think. But, a true countryman and someone that... speaks very well and understands what we're all
Johnny
up
Carter,
against.
yeah, very well. I mean, his experience for a relatively young guy, I mean, he's been everywhere. He's done it. He's been a keeper in this country. He's been a professional hunter in Africa. He's worked in a gun shop. He does video. He writes very well. I called him up and I said to him, Johnny, can you write? And he said, yeah, of course I can write. And I thought I was going to be sort of disappointed. This was going to be like a bridge too far. But actually, he writes very well. Yeah,
so I'm just flicking through here. Really interesting piece. Lindsay Waddell looks at the use of snares and how that's changed over time and what the future might hold for pest control. So I think that's something that, there's potentially changes coming there. And that's another piece which is...
snares are a fascinating one because, look, I mean, we could all Google snaring foxes now, and the images we would see would be pretty horrific. And I know people in the shooting community who don't like the idea of snaring. I went down to see a wild bird keeper on a place that won the Purdy Award last year, a young guy called Frank Snudden, and he said to me, look, you need to understand that if snaring went, grey partridge conservation in this country would be pretty much over. And he was pretty convincing on that, actually. So for me, that was a bit of an eye-opener, because there's just the fundamental point that when crops get up, you can't shoot foxes because that you can't see them. So snaring is there all day, every day. They're checking these snares every day. So it's another one of those. You know what I mean? It's a pretty thorny topic, but it's
and I think it will feature again in the news. There's going to be
more
about it.
Yeah.
It will pop
It's a hugely emotive issue, and in Wales now it's gone. So
yeah. And great to see Giles Catchpole in the mag. He's always
Big
a
Giles,
very amusing read. Yeah, so
very knowledgeable man. Also a part-time motorcycle instructor.
Interesting.
Yeah, which was you find this. There's something shooting times writers throughout time have been sort of curious Renaissance men and rogues of
Yourself included.
Myself included. I'm not a motorcycle instructor. I can't in fact even ride a motorcycle, but yeah.
Something I enjoy annually is the scores of all the roebucks that come in.
Yeah.
It's nice to see that there's Scotland is definitely
leading the way,
showing that giving Hampshire a run for its money.
Perthshire. Is it Perthshire or Angus always does quite well?
Yeah, both. I think. Hampshire and West Sussex, I think, are
other ones.
But and I'm just looking at the list here.
Got roe the size of a moose there in Hampshire.
Yeah, well, that's good to see that. And
you've probably almost got to the recipe page there, which is a real. That's always a real favourite of mine. I really if I went part time, I would cook every recipe in every issue of Shooting Times, but I'm not sure that's going to happen anytime soon.
Yeah, and I've just stumbled across a subscription offer that we've got on to go with the Glorious 12th. We've got a 12% discount, which includes shooting insurance. So there's a complimentary membership to the Sporting Shooters Association, and part of the benefits of that is shooting insurance.
And that is completely comprehensive shooting insurance, right? It's everything that you
public
can possibly
liability
want.
up to £2 million. So if you subscribe and take up this offer, you will have your shooting insurance included for no extra cost. So you get 12% off the subscription, and you get your shooting insurance included. So I think that's a great offer. And we're very happy to get people insured. I think that's a very good thing to do.
Yeah. So looking forward, Simon, we've got a lot of people actually. It's been a great coming together of some fantastic titles. I'm really looking forward to getting some of the guys from Trout and Salmon on the podcast, actually. I know that, not all of our guys who read, and girls, of course, who read Shooting Times Fish, but lots of them do. And the guys on Trout and Salmon are a really interesting team, real kind of veteran journalists there. I enjoy texting Andrew Flitcroft. I ask him for tips on flies and so on. He sometimes replies, I think, when he's got time, sometimes doesn't. So it'd be great to get him on there.
Definitely.
We've got guys who know a hell of a lot about stalking. Great to get them on there. Who else? You spend a lot of time hunting in the States and all over the place, actually. Who would you love to get on?
So in the last issue we had, I accompanied the last issue of Field Sports Journal.
Which is one of our sister titles.
One of our sister titles, yeah. I was lucky enough to go along with Steve Hornady, who is the president of Hornady Ammunition, and he hunted a Kashmir markhor in Pakistan in the Hindu Kush foothills of the Himalayas, and I accompanied him on that hunt, which was fantastic. And it was in the last issue, which is still the current.
And just tell me, are those? What's the conservation status of those? How does that work?
So I go into it in some detail in the article. They were IUCN Red List threatened, and they are going to become extinct. And they
are going to become extinct.
They were right in the late 80s. They were on the red list, and then the Pakistani government and IUCN decided that they would issue 2 licenses every year. For a huge price. So at the time over $100,000. I think they're nearly $200,000 now. 80% of the proceeds would go back to the local community, and now there is a viable population, and they've moved out of the red into the least threatened category. So the only difference is the local people are now looking at it as a commercial income or an income for new water pipes that come down from the top of the mountains to the villages. They built schools.
Were they poached before, or how did that?
They were competing with domesticated goats for food, and also the locals would try and poison the snow leopards to stop them eating their domesticated goats, and the markhor would get caught in snares and get wrapped up in poison. And so now they want to keep the markhor because they can see the financial benefit to them on the ground, and they've become custodians. So it's been a really amazing conservation story where hunting and conservation have gone hand in hand.
That'd be really cool to get him on there.
Love to get Steve on. He's a bit of a cantankerous guy, but he's
also just I think it's fascinating. I mean, I read a book. I sent you a copy of it, I think, actually, on like a cultural history of hunting in America. Which shows really interesting. It's just interesting to talk to those guys in the States because, you know, we sort of share a common language and we're both ostensibly into the same thing, nearly. But actually, when you get talking to them, you realize it's a very different culture. And I don't think they have the kind of gung-ho sporting culture that we often think they do in this country, which is very interesting, you know, with limits and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, they're very... They're true sportsmen. I've hunted in Nebraska during the whitetail season, which is 8 days long. It's heavily regulated, and people are very strict about following the regulations and the game laws and the seasons. And there's a census done to identify how many animals can be hunted, and you have to apply for a tag. For some species, if you're a resident in the state, you get a different level of kind of opportunity. If you're a non-resident, as I am, then you sometimes go into a draw, and over a period of time you accrue points, which helps you to get more preference in the draw the following year. So I'm hunting a pronghorn antelope in Wyoming in October, a species I've not hunted before. I think it's the only antelope species to cast its horns.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, a very interesting species.
That's really interesting, yeah.
So, I'm sure I'll write about that and it'll end up somewhere.
I'm going up to the Hebrides to shoot some geese. That's as exotic as it's getting for me this year. But no, that'd be really interesting. I think we shouldn't shy away from getting people on the podcast who have views that are different from our own. So, we were talking about Mark Avery. He's got a new book out, very interesting book. Maybe get... we're talking about Chris Packham and his poodles. Get Chris on here with some poodle training tips, and we can delve into
who we've both spoken to.
Yeah. I think he used to do a bit of fishing when he was young. So maybe we're not as different as we sometimes think.
I mean, we had him as we interviewed him in Field Sports Journal over 2 parts, which divided opinion, as we knew it would do. But we felt there was an opportunity to try and engage rather than attack. And I'm not saying that everybody attacks, but there are some people that choose that route to engage him, and we've all seen how that works out in legal battles.
I think I maybe even got a little mention in that interview as the young editor of a field sports magazine. He wasn't open to any of the exciting ideas that Chris had, which I don't think is entirely true. I think he was.
I would say 80% of what he wants and 80% of what we want are the same, but there's 20% that we do that's abhorrent to him. Which I don't think we'll ever align on. But there are a lot of things that we all want, which is, a vibrant, healthy ecosystem, which we all know we want. We want to see a net benefit to our activities with a harvestable surplus,
and a thriving venison market. I think lots of us want to see that. Probably Chris Packham included.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, I think that probably just about wraps up our first podcast. Thank
you for having me on, Patrick.
Oh, thank you very much for better paper stock.
Let's hope the readers enjoy it.
Yeah. No. So we'll be every week, every Wednesday from here on in. We will be talking about the latest issue of ST with a real focus on the news and the chewy topics. And we really look forward to getting all sorts of people on there. So we hope you've enjoyed listening. This has been the Shooting Times podcast, published by Field Sports Press. The latest issue is on the shelves today, on the shelves for a week, and we very much look forward to getting back on the airwaves next week.